Alexander, what's happening, brother?
Good to see you. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm asking all the questions people ask me. Is it Alex? Is it Alexander? I'm like, dude, I'm not a doctor. You're not gonna piss me off if you call me Alex.
I have strict criteria.
Yeah, right.
Here's my manual.
Well, you have a heck of a resume, so why don't we kick off with that? Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you've been up to over the last couple of years. And then I always like to go back to the beginning and kind of hear how it all started.
Yeah. Where to start? In short, recently we've been working on PortfolioPilot, an AI financial advisor. And so the idea is, complete replacement for a human financial advisor, everything from financial planning, estate planning, thinking about retirement, short-term goals, investing strategies, cash, taxes, tax optimization, fees, uh, whatever you need to do to be able to feel a little bit better about your current financial situation. And honestly, I don't know about accidentally built this, but I built something for myself a couple of years ago,
Hmm.
and then it's turned into something quite real. Now we have about $30 billion of assets on the platform, and it's growing like crazy. And the whole thing basically started after I sold my previous company, which was autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicle software, also AI, also sort of regulated environments, and trust is a huge component. But basically, we sold the company in 2021, and I was talking to financial advisors and quote unquote experts that end up feeling a lot more like salespeople than people that were going to be a guide through my financial life. And we have two small kids now, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And my wife also runs a startup that's quite successful in the drug development space. And I built, sort of the small little financial optimization engine for myself that's, blossomed into what it is now. And so my previous company went through Y Combinator, and you know that I started my previous company when I was I think 23 years old. So like ended up getting like a 30 under 30 award, and worked at NASA before that, and worked in India, Germany, LA, San Francisco, Toronto, Vancouver, and probably a couple other places over the years. And so it's been kind of a wild ride, and sort of at the core of it, I think it's just like having fun, learning things, and like trying to have some real impact on the world.
So on my notes here, I have 30 billion, Y Combinator, exit, 30 under 30, lived in India, Germany, and then he mentioned something about NASA. Uh, so, so let's go back to the beginning. Like, what did you study in school? I saw you have 2 degrees.
I did engineering, physics, and economics, which feels a little bit like everything. And between us, I couldn't like quite figure out what I wanted to do. I could never quite see myself as a programmer. Never quite see myself as like just doing marketing or civil engineering. And I like to think that if I could get sort of close to the edge of a field, then I would be able to find some interesting new insight that I could build a company around. It was pretty like early on set on the idea of starting something myself, and building something where specifically in a place where others would have a very hard time replicating what I built.
Hmm.
And so the idea of building another consumer social app like wasn't very exciting. And I think sort of the overlap of engineering, physics, and economics is all about modeling. And
Hmm.
so it's all complex systems modeling. It's trying to think about how the world works, how physical systems work, how do you build something at scale, how does the economy work, how do you build it to the point where it's actually useful. And so, just doing science for like sake of publishing papers or like the academia route like never really appealed to me. But the idea of like really building some complex model of how the world works in a specific domain and then applying it to some practical application, really exciting. Very difficult for others to do that. I like to think I have some unique edge in that. And you know didn't take long to like start the first company.
Mm, I got my, copy of Thinking in Systems right here
There you
next to
go.
me.
At the end of the day, it's all systems thinking.
Yeah. Well, why don't we talk about that a little bit? Because maybe I'm having a tough time getting into her writing. But so, like, what does that mean to you, like, systems thinking?
Uh, okay, one example. Right now, we have I set up this like mastermind group for a bunch of like YC founders, at least like Y Combinator founders.
Mhm,
So we meet every week. There's like seven, eight of us. Five, six people join every single week. Everyone sort of brings up different problems. We talk about like specific things, right? Everything from marketing stuff to co-founder disputes to fundraising, whatever it is. And so the topic that I was bringing up today and we were talking about was basically just like building a marketing machine.
mm,
And if I think about marketing, I think a lot of people think about marketing more of an art than a sort of a system,
mhm,
where it feels like every piece is like you have some genius or some marketing expert that creates a social post, and if you get the right hook and if you think about the audience correctly, if you post it at the right time, there's like clearly scientific elements to that, but at the end of the day it's sort of like you can learn how to produce like one great piece of content to put it out there.
mm.
I think that still feels like art to me. Like if I think about systems thinking, I think about like our marketing machine, where you sort of zoom out from the individual post to like what would it take for us to produce 400 to put out 400 pieces of content in a given month that are all high quality
It's a lot of content.
or at least pass some quality bar,
Yeah.
right? And we're a relatively small team. We're a 10-person team. There's three people on marketing, plus me, and I'm spending, I don't know, 30% of my time on sort of marketing partnerships. And if you think about this as this machine that, every month delivers 400 pieces of content to a bunch of different channels, then you start thinking about like, okay, what are all the different distribution opportunities between Reddit and Twitter and our website? And like, we just bought this media company recently. And so, like, that's a big part of the sort of like the distribution engine here. How do we actually generate the insights that go into this machine? How do we set up pipelines for that? Part of it is like AI, but like the idea of AI sort of like creating the ideas themselves, like not that useful. And so there's topical things and there's things that we can surface automatically from our insights engine. And like you almost need to create this machine for the rest of the company and everyone in the rest of the company to sort of just like surface interesting stuff they come across and automatically filter the news. And there's a whole compliance process within all that because we're a registered investment advisor with the SEC.
Right.
And then like there's taste and how do you sort of like get the right hooks and how do you do experimentation. And I think if you start thinking about it in that way, you think about like this as a fairly complex system. And like it's not just something we control, it also depends on everything else that's happening in the rest of Twitter, the rest of the world, what's happening in news. There's these different cycles. You decide whether you want to have like very quick feedback loops or very long feedback loops around like what exactly you measure in the system. It's quite hard to like objectively say and score some piece of content. You sort of need to, with complex systems, you basically need to put something out there to like probe and look at the response.
Mm.
And there's a response delay. And so sometimes you don't know exactly how good a YouTube video was or some short you put out on Instagram or some reel you put out on Instagram until a week or two later. And so you keep producing content in the meantime, sort of layer in these insights as you go. I think that's all systems thinking, right? It's like it's very ill defined. Like it's not a linear A to B. There's lots of feedback loops in the middle of that. It's very hard to measure directly, and so you like have to build these fairly complex models to be able to even measure it and estimate it.
Mhm.
And it's oftentimes like you build the model and you can't directly verify whether the model is good or not, whether it's accurate or not. You basically need the model to predict something. And then, if you do that in the real world as well and you end up with the same thing, then it's likely that, your system is correct in a certain set of use cases.
Mhm.
And so even then you can't really like fully validate the system.
Classic use cases like the weather, right? Like, as you said, the weatherman can predict the weather sometimes, but not all the time, because
Exactly.
it is
Yeah.
just so complicated. There's so many elements that go into it. But what it sounds like from your content perspective is you're trying to break this down into the smaller little component parts and pieces so you can zoom out and look at it as a whole and say, hey, if we want to get this output, this outflow, as Danella would
Mm.
say, then we have to have this input here. So you need the input to get the output. And then you're looking at all of how that reacts in the middle to that output.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, like I want to be able to build a system that I can continuously improve.
Mm,
And like I think my main worry with marketing, I've spoken to lots of people about this, and I don't think people have like a very good answer for me. A lot of it is just like find your niche and really know your ICP, and like it's like I feel like it's very linear, and like some people really strike gold, right? But I almost feel like it's by accident rather than because of some repeated process, or like people create a mental model without even really knowing they're creating a mental model,
mhm.
right? They get the feedback and they're good enough to say like that was kind of weird. Like when I started talking about these things every week, I got way more reactions
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah.
That's kind of fun. Let me lean more into that.
Mhm.
And obviously, if the signal is powerful enough, you can do that and strike gold and keep getting deeper and deeper and deeper. But I feel like I need to be able to create a machine that does that automatically and like is able to react to a lot of the smaller signals too.
Mhm. So
And so I think a lot of the motivation here around the marketing machine is being able to build a model that we can continuously improve on.
mhm. Mm. You said something interesting. You said when you were thinking about you starting something, you wanted to move into a space that you thought was going to be difficult for others to replicate, something
Mm.
along those lines. How did you arrive at that conclusion, and where did that eventually go? Because I feel like a lot of people that we deal with a lot of people in the food industry,
Mm.
and it's a lot of like I hate to say like it's a Me Too plus one, but it's like I talk about it with brands like Clockface, like you want to innovate, but you don't want to go to like 6 p.m. Like that's confusing. That's like a 180-degree turn for people. Like you maybe don't need like America's not ready for bug chips. Like it's just not that you don't need that innovation, right? But maybe you need like
Yeah, exactly.
one or two, hours or 1 or 2 degrees kind of. But it sounds like you were kind
I
of thinking of like, how do I make something that nobody else can replicate?
I think there's a difference between like introducing a product that's so different than from people like what from people are used to, than building something unique, having some mode, having some like differentiated tech
Mm,
that allows you to do the thing that people want to do, even if it's 10% better. I don't.
okay.
It doesn't need to be 10 times better necessarily. I agree with you that it could be confusing, right? My previous company was autonomous vehicles, and like, I mean, I lived in a bubble for like 7 years where like everyone talked about autonomous vehicles and self-driving cars and robots and autonomous submarines and drones and air taxis and all this world. And I mean, we built an amazing, like, massive business and got regulatory approvals in 9 countries and scaled to hundreds of clients and worked with Fortune 500s. But like, it never achieved, I don't know, Amazon scale, right? It didn't become like mass consumer.
Hmm.
it didn't need to because we were selling it at like a pretty high price points, and like that niche we were serving was like pretty developed already, and a lot of it is about like sort of replacing dull, dirty, dangerous jobs, and not like self-driving cars you see on the road.
Mm,
But I mean, self-driving cars are finally now in 2025 like really scaling up exponentially,
mhm,
right? I think I read recently that the number of lifts, the number of like Google Waymo self-driving car rides that happen in San Francisco is more than Lyft already at this point.
mm.
And I think Waymo in California is now doing 700,000 rides a month, fully autonomous, like paid rides. And so,
Pretty
it's
legit,
it's getting
but
there. It's like getting
I will say
to scale.
I've never seen one in my whole life. That must be like a California thing. Never ever seen one.
You must live in like some city in
Yeah, yeah,
Ohio or
some
something.
crazy place.
uh, I like there's obviously like something about the density that's extremely useful, right? And like San Francisco, Austin, Phoenix, LA, those places, where they are pervasive. Like they're truly everywhere. I but you're asking about I think something similar to like the Peter Thiel mentality of like competition is for losers,
Mm,
where I think fundamentally, if you are a food company and you are delivering a new kind of cookie, then it is just so difficult to break out. And you're probably spending like 99% of your incremental time on marketing and just trying to like eke out a small edge. Whereas, like, I like to think that we can spend most of our effort on the core product.
mm,
And, there's sort of like a natural defensibility to that, and that it's differentiated enough that it sells itself, and there's a significant amount of word of mouth. And that if we even put a little bit of money behind marketing, then it grows exponentially, and I don't really need to constantly worry about innovating on the stuff that doesn't matter in the business. The
mm,
marketing messaging and the brand building, like that part isn't nearly as important, I think, for us building, an AI financial advisor as, this sort of differentiated cookie.
mm,
And I think the main reason for that is because there's just something inherently hard, and you're not going to come across 10 different AI financial advisors. The first one you come across, you're like, well, this is kind of cool, right? Like, I don't know if I'm ready for AI to manage my money for me, but the idea that AI can find some optimization opportunities for me,
mhm,
really compelling. And it's free to try out. There's a 2-week free trial. Let me add one of my portfolios and like some settings and give it some insights and get some feedback on that. I think that is like inherently difficult to build, which means that we don't have that much competition, which means that it's way easier for us to just like put ourselves out into the world, and we can focus much more on building a better onboarding process or making sure that the advice that we give is like really world class, and I don't know, the underlying data systems and that sort of thing,
mm,
even in a relatively crowded space in consumer fintech.
mm.
There's something very differentiated about our specific kind of product that we're putting out there.
Yeah,
And same thing with autonomous vehicle software, right? Like who is able to replicate something like that? I mean, I had to convince regulators and venture capitalists and early employees and some of our beta customers to like take a bet on us. But once they did, then, you know, basically like the biggest reason why we like someone acquired the company was because we had like a 7-year head start on our next competitor,
Mm.
right? So they had an insane moat.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, working in the autonomous vehicle space, you heard this guy's name, more than you could probably even remember. But that seems like what Elon has done. He's just like, I'm just gonna do like the craziest business ideas that no one ever even like considered. And like
Mm.
that's my barrier to entry is just like I'm gonna shoot satellites into the sky and provide everyone internet. You're like, that guy is a maniac. And he might be a maniac, but like he has delivered on a lot of projects. Um,
Yeah, exactly. And like people, like it's way easier to hire engineers for that kind of business, right?
mm,
It's just like it's exciting to take people on the mission and do something different. And I think when you talk about it at parties, people say like, "Wait, what are you doing? How do you even do that? Where do
mm.
I go to download that?" I think it also feels like it naturally feels better to be doing something unique.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is the case. I guess I feel this a little bit if we're talking about like posting on social, right? It's like, do I really have a what's the right word? Like, do I have a right to post on social?
You don't.
Like that's sort of a weird sentence, but like I don't know, like there's lots of other people talking about this news event today. Am I really contributing something to the conversation?
Oh, for
I
sure.
imagine if I'm building like another cookie, then you must ask yourself, like, do I have a right to play here? Right? It's like, is this a good use of shelf space? Is my cookie really that much better? And like, I don't know really anything about this world, but like, imagine if I think about like the cookies that I've bought for my kids over the last couple of years, there's definitely innovations on cookies. Like, and it's kind of wild, right? But I don't think I've bought an Oreo in like 10 years.
Mhm.
Uh, and there's something about health, or there's something about organic or shape, or like there's clearly lots of different ways you can innovate on cookies. But it's like this like tiny incremental move that like requires a significant effort to sell, and like I can't even imagine like what Safeway or Whole Foods, like what you have to go through to get to the level where I'm even able to see it in a grocery store.
Mhm. Oh, yeah, it's a process for sure. 100%. Yeah, so talk to me about, how you decided on this first company that you were gonna launch, and, like, clearly it worked out, you were part of Y Combinator. I'm not sure if that was your first company that was part of Y Combinator. You raised.
Yeah, that was the first company, like summer 16. I mean, basically, part of it was just like someone needed to build it,
Mm,
and I think you like it was so clear to me that like someone needed to build this thing. Like basically we built collision avoidance systems for flying autonomous vehicles,
okay.
like commercial drones, air taxis. Basically if you want to use drones to be able to do agricultural surveys or mining exploration or pipeline inspection, forestry management, cargo delivery, but you're sort of in the middle of nowhere,
Mhm.
but you're still flying in the national airspace. And so the FAA and other civil aviation authorities around the world require you to visually clear the airspace around you
Mm.
to make sure that there's not, a crop duster flying around, or to make sure that there's not a paraglider or a hot air balloon or a little Cessna, right? The sort of 50% of aircraft are 50% of like flying aircraft are sort of the really well known ones taking off from the big airports, carrying passengers, doing FedEx, Amazon deliveries.
Mhm.
And then the other ones are like all the small little ones, and the big ones have the transponders and they fly in the actual air routes, and the small ones basically get to do whatever they want.
Yeah, they just buzz around, having fun.
They buzz around and they're just like, let's like fly around the silo. And So if we're talking about introducing hundreds of thousands or millions of commercial drones into the airspace, you know, the government wants those drones to be able to see the world the way pilots do. And I worked at NASA for a little while on computer vision systems. I worked at a little drone package delivery startup in 2013 in Silicon Valley.
Mm.
I was the first software engineer. We basically built the system from the ground up. It was sort of around the time that Jeff Bezos said, by 2020, we're going to have 1 million drones in the air doing package delivery. He was like maybe a little bit off on that specific prediction.
Yeah. He retired and
Uh,
passed the torch, yeah, so
exactly. Yeah. I'm going to build other flying things.
yeah. Well,
I mean, it was kind of clear to me that at some point soon, someone is going to have to build one of these collision avoidance systems. And like, there's lots of drone companies, and there's like sort of this like growing race of like toy drones and photography drones, and there's lots of military drones. And but to like really fly beyond line of sight in commercial aviation and the national airspace, they need to be able to avoid really anything.
mm,
And every single person in the drone space that I talk to, like I'm the kind of person just like, okay, if something's bothering me, I'll just like relentlessly call people or email people and send out 1,000 emails and call 100 people in the space to just like try to get my question answered. And everyone sort of said like, oh, someone will figure it out. Like radar is still kind of like size, weight, and power is too much, and it's very expensive.
what do you
I'm not gonna
what do you mean by that?
like mount a big radar system
Oh,
on
on each
on my
drone. I
drone,
see.
right? Like if we're talking about doing sort of like a 3-hour agricultural survey, then you have like a 10-foot wingspan drone, with a really big battery on board and takes off from like a little runway.
Mm,
And that's the kind of thing we're talking about, right? Not sort of massive military drone, but also a little bit bigger than a little DJI, one of those little, white or black drones that you see like taking pictures. Right? Something in between, something a little bit more robust. But you can't put a 20-pound radar system on that drone that costs
mm,
$50,000.
right.
And so I think the general sort of mentality from everyone that I talked to was, yeah, someone will figure out how to miniaturize the radar systems.
Mm,
But kind of, I talked to people that were building radar systems, and they said, like, yeah, it's coming, 20 years from now, 20, 30 years from now. A lot of it is like in hardware development in particular, you have to go through lots of cycles, and then there's actual physical limitations,
yeah.
right? Even if you get the sensor array down to a small enough size, you can build finer sensors to be able to separate the radio waves that come back. You still need to introduce a significant amount of power to go out into the world for a few miles and then come back to your sensor.
Mhm.
And like everyone just didn't have a good answer. And
Mm,
it just seemed to me like if we want these drones to navigate the world the way pilots do, why don't we just put some cameras on board and just build some computer vision algorithms and literally let them see the world the way pilots do.
mm,
And everyone I asked about that specific solution said, like, I don't know, like computer vision, AI, like that sounds way more difficult than just buying a radar sensor and just like measuring the distance to like the other aircraft.
mm,
But I'd seen some like fairly cutting edge computer vision stuff. We were just around the time in 2015 where we had like AlexNet and ImageNet and sort of like deep learning, like neural nets for computer vision. And this like suddenly gets way super technical, but it's basically the precursor for like what is now large language models
mm,
and like ChatGPT, Anthropic type models. And like there was embedded GPUs from NVIDIA that were just starting to get good enough. And so kind of felt like right time, right place. I was arrogant enough to think that I could actually solve that problem and felt like I didn't have very much to lose. And like, if it was mostly just software, I could actually just, I think I had $10,000 in total saved up, but zero obligations, right? As a like 23-year-old. And just decided to start coding this and sort of spent a year just like building a prototype that we eventually showed to some partners at Y Combinator, and they said like, this is exciting, definitely can sort of follow the thread through to absolutely massive industry that's unlocked and needs this very specific piece of the supply chain,
Mm.
very difficult to replicate for anybody else. It needs a lot of venture capital funding, so you're going to need to move down to San Francisco to do that.
Mm.
You got to find, a computer vision expert. It's nice that you worked at NASA and have done some like cutting edge computer vision research and written some papers, but like, let's get some real PhDs in here that have done this and are actually at the edge of the field, and find some advisors that, you know, are professors in this field for 20, 30 years, that can sort of steer you in the right direction. And then it sort of felt like just like one foot in front of the other to like cross the next, to cross the next chasm, to like solve the next problem. Part of it was the computer vision algorithm. Part of it was like, how do we even test this thing? Right. So we built these like really complicated simulation environments where we could do millions of midair collisions like
Mm.
virtually. So we had the server room at a certain point in an office in San Francisco. We had like probably a fourth of the entire office was just like this big server room with stacks of servers that were just automatically generating virtual environments, different lighting conditions, and different types of planes and hot air balloons. And actually, birds and clouds were the biggest problem. So
Mm.
we spent a lot of time simulating birds and clouds, because like, you need to be able to tell, 4 pixels across, 2 miles away, is that a cloud that is hitting the sun in slightly different way,
Mm.
or is that a Cessna coming directly towards me? And you have like 4 seconds to figure that out, right?
Mm.
Because like, these planes move pretty fast.
Right.
And so like, we ran all the simulations. That wasn't quite good enough for the FAA. They wanted us to do real live testing.
Mm.
A very reasonable ask, but that was sort of a crazy conversation where we said, hold on, you want us to fly a drone at a real manned aircraft and make sure it dives out of the way? And they said, well, do it safely
Ah,
and like,
right.
don't break any laws.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically you need to figure out a way to collect that data.
You couldn't do
And
drone on drone there? They wanted
we
drone
did
on
it for a
drone.
while. We actually, so you can get these model aircraft, right? And so we did a whole bunch of model aircraft against drone, and that wasn't quite good enough for them. And even in our own testing, the scale is very off.
I see.
Like that's like actually hard to get like true good scaled model aircraft. The light reflects them in a different way because the metal is quite different than the foam oftentimes that
Mm.
these like model aircraft are built from. It like worked for a little while, but you also want like hot air balloons and
Yeah,
birds,
jeez.
and you want lots of different like cloud conditions for all like false positive flights. And so we, at a certain point, we hired a bush pilot from Alaska who was crazy enough to get in an airplane and fly it
From what I
against
know, that's where all the crazy bush pilots are, is in Alaska.
he was like absolutely awesome, added a flair to the company that was like very different than sort of like the computer vision research, engineers on the team and the regulatory people that we had.
That was probably the safest
And
job that that guy had done too. Just like, "Yeah, it's just a drone, it's not gonna be a big deal."
he uh he loved it, right? Like, he absolutely every single day he just like he got paid to fly,
Yeah.
right? And just to rack up hours and just like land in the middle of nowhere, go in different environments. And because sometimes we'd be like, okay, we need rain videos. We there's a storm coming, And so like we're gonna need sort of like very dark cumulonimbus clouds like in the background because they screw with the like vision system, right? And they like screws with our tracking algorithm. So we need like all these like deep dark clouds, and sort of like right at the edge. And obviously this was like a huge risk for the business as well, right? And so like I remember bringing this up at some board meeting with our investors, and they're like, no, you can't do that. That's like, are you crazy? This like one accident away from this whole company being bankrupt. And so, how are we going to do this in a safe way? So we ended up hiring like a team of drone pilots, and then we thought like, okay, who is the exact opposite of like this Alaskan bush pilot? And I found this guy who was absolutely amazing. Who was a he spent 30 years with the Navy as a ship captain, and like had dealt with pirates attacks in Somalia,
Jeez.
and like missile testing, and like this guy like used a checklist to like hook up our trailer hitch every morning. This and so we paired the two of them together and basically said like, okay, naval captain, you're in charge of this operation, and like you have to make sure that no one crashes here. And then you have this guy who's like a little bit of a loose cannon that you guys need to figure out how to work together,
Yeah.
right? And like it was in many ways, like actually one of the things that we pioneered like in this company was this like general idea of complex bounding functions.
Hmm.
And it's like this general idea that you can use sort of like mechanistic, like basically real world physical models to be able to lay out the constraints, right? Like we're flying along, you can use the velocity of the aircraft that you're flying on to be able to map out the like 3D environment around you, and you know that the sky is up and the earth is down, and sort of like physical constraints about the world. And then within that, you can let the AI search and like discover like really like you can basically use the accuracy of the AI and sort of like the high reliability of the AI within this complex bounding function.
Mm.
And so in some ways, this like naval captain together with the bush pilot was like something similar to that, whereas like I know things aren't going to go off the rails and we're not going to have a crash. And then within that, we could basically ask for like all the crazy maneuvers and lighting and like environments that we want, and like feel safe about that.
Mm.
And so we ended up collecting about 20,000 near midair collisions,
Jeez.
like on video, fully recorded, 3D positioning. And like that is a huge part of what allowed us to get the regulatory approvals. And so to go all the way back to like, what does it mean to do something differentiated? Like, who's going to copy that? Like, who's
Right.
crazy enough to do that? And we didn't really know that we would need to build all this at the very beginning, right? Like, this is kind of what I'm saying. Like, I was naive enough to just start and assume that we would figure things out along the way.
Mhm.
And we got lucky a bunch, along the way. And, we didn't run out of money before we figured out all the core problems. And, like tech progressed at the pace that it needed to. And we found the right people at the right time. But I think that's a huge part of it. Like, I think it's a huge part of what holds people back from starting in the first place. It's just like, I haven't figured out how to solve every problem here yet. And, let me just wait a little bit longer until I like figure out what my edge is, for this specific case.
Well, I think you're 100% right. Like in my case, I for some reason started a business while I was in college. So I think just like once I got out of college, I went, "Okay, I've done this before. That wasn't that crazy. I was able to overcome these things that I didn't know, so I could do
Mm,
that again." But probably similar to you, I mean, if you wouldn't have started that first business, it's like, would I have ever started business number 2 or 3 or 4? So I just tell people all the time, like, if you want to start something, just start something. Like, don't overthink it.
yeah.
Like, and don't think I have to do this for the next 30 years. Like, you might even be better suited to be like, I'm going to do it for 6 months and just like see what it's like. Um, because if you never start that first thing, it just gets so much harder as I think you get older, to like,
I think so too, right? Especially earlier on. But I don't know. Now I have kids too, and I don't know if I have less or more flexibility now running business number two than I would, like, I don't know, working a job at Google, right? If I need to cancel a bunch of meetings in the middle of the day, like, the company does slightly worse, right? Because I'll end up being a bottleneck for a bunch of things in the company, but I'm not going to get yelled at by my boss, right? I'm not, going to be slightly less likely to get that next promotion because I'm not a team player and always there,
yeah.
right? There's like incredible amount of flexibility that comes along with like starting your own business.
For sure, I think that probably it's also a place in time of where you are in life that like you had this exit, right? And you're not like, well, shoot, I can't go, take care of the kids. We've got to make this next sale, or else like we're gonna go under. So it's just a different place in
Yeah.
life, and you're at a great spot because of that. So, talk to me a little bit, if you can, before we move on to the finance side of things, about the exit. Like, what was life like during that? How did you prep up for that? How did you know that it was time to do that? Maybe just talk us through that, because most people will never exit a company. That's like the dream thing out there in the future, but it's just hard to do. It's not for
Yeah,
everybody.
I think the ideal is to get bought and not sell the company,
Yeah.
right? Like I think that's like a very important distinction. And so I think we were in a very unique place where we were 7 years into running the company. We had spent all this time collecting test data, building the tech, getting the customers, getting the regulatory approvals. We had this incredible moat to like no one was really anywhere close to what we were doing, and like to compete with us was wild. And we basically had a regulated monopoly
Mm, because no one else
where
like had this level of approval that you had.
yeah, and it was pretty clear that the FAA and other regulatory agencies required you to have this kind of collision avoidance system on board. And so they didn't explicitly say, like, you can only use iris automation,
Hmm.
but they said, you need a collision avoidance system on board if you're going to fly more than 1 mile away from an operator. And you need to be able to prove to us that it has been sufficiently tested and is like good enough.
Mm.
And so, if only one company and one sensor package, meets those qualifications, then we can basically set the price and like do whatever we want,
Mm.
right?
So who were you selling to? Were you selling to drone manufacturers, or are you selling to like software companies for drones?
We were mostly selling to the end users.
Oh,
And so, like, imagine if you're, I don't know, if you're a utility company
okay.
and you have 300,000 miles of power lines to inspect,
Hmm.
and you have to inspect it because of wildfires, and like you need a certain clearance from the power lines to the trees around it, right? Typically they have these access roads and you just have like a bunch of people just driving around in trucks just checking the power
Well,
lines.
that's one thing, but
And
also there's like quarries where it's like, hey, it's like hard to get down there, and other use cases, I'm sure.
yeah, this is the most ideal situation where you like have actually built an access road like close to the power lines. Some people are walking the power lines. Some power lines just never get inspected at all. They just take the risk. Sometimes they like rent airplanes and just fly the power lines,
Mm.
and it's like it's expensive to rent the airplane and the pilots, right? And so the ideal scenario here is just, whether it's pipelines or power lines or agricultural surveys or forest management or railroad inspections, like just fly a bunch of drones along that power line, right? So the end user, whether you're like the railroad company or the power line company or the forest management company, is typically buying, you know, they train a bunch of people on their team to be operators of these drones. They buy the drones themselves. They buy any like sensor systems around it. They buy the camera package or the infrared sensors or they buy a bunch of software for like sort of their control system. They buy radios. So they're basically like putting together these kits,
Mm.
right? And one part of that kit needs to be the like collision avoidance system. And so like we partnered with the drone manufacturers as well to just sell it as like an integrated kit, as you can imagine. So we set up a lot of these like distribution partnerships, and those drone companies would be able to market themselves as like collision avoidance enabled, or like beyond visual line of sight enabled. And then we partnered with this one company that basically built transponder systems.
Okay.
So super complementary, right? So the idea is that like our system can sense everything that isn't sending off a transponder system, and then their system could sense everybody that was cooperative
I see.
and like emitting. And so the two of us together would allow you to detect all cooperative and non-cooperative traffic around you, and like truly feel safe flying in any airspace.
Hmm.
And that company got bought by a private equity
The
firm,
transponder company.
and the transponder company. And that transponder company, like as part of the acquisition of this private equity firm, basically said, look, you should acquire us for sure, but a perfect complement here to truly own the space and have this like monopoly is this other company, Iris Automation. You should just buy us both at the same time and like basically roll up into this like mega company that like corners the
Dang, hope you gave him a good referral fee after that.
market.
Sent
And so basically that was it. It was like fairly quick process. This private equity firm like immediately started making all their own plans. They like the like a very frustrating part of that process was they did not care at all what we had done in the past.
mm.
Like I imagine if you're acquiring, I imagine in most cases if you're acquiring a company, you're like, what have you like? What's worked? What's not worked? Train us up on all the systems. Tell us what's going on. And they were just like, no, don't care. Like you have this monopoly. You've built the tech. You have the regulatory approvals. Like we're just gonna fire half the team. We're gonna bring in this like this ex Boeing guy to basically just run things from here. We're gonna stop talking about computer vision, AI, robotics, autonomous vehicles. From now on, we speak one language. It's the language of safety, safety, safety.
Hmm.
We have a lobbying team that we're going to work with for DC. Like,
Jeez.
we're going to move headquarters from San Francisco to DC from now on.
Whoa.
It was like, I mean, I learned a tremendous amount going through that process. But I mean, it was honestly kind of wild. For me, it was like one day, I felt like one day through the next, I was like in it to just like on the outside.
Yeah, like we don't need you anymore, buddy.
It's like, here's your check. Now, like, go like right off into the
Well,
distance.
I got news for you. They always fire half the team. If there's anything that I've learned, it's that they always are like gonna fire an enormous group of people. And they don't have any regard for like who the best people are. Sometimes they actually like seem to go out of their way to fire the best people and leave the people you're like, why did you leave that person?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of wild, right? Like, we spent so much time recruiting incredible computer vision talent. And like, we are competing with the self driving car companies and with Google and Amazon and Facebook. And like, these people were basically gone like day two.
Mm.
And I mean, they ended up like there are people from that former team now working on like at Waymo, and Zoox is like another like up and coming self driving car company, and like GM had Cruise, and there's like some really cool robotics companies that they're a part of now. My LinkedIn feed is like a bunch of cool demos and like still some of that self driving car world. Um, but I mean, it ended up being like sort of the right natural step for the company as well. We had a lot of board conversations about like, should we take this offer or not? We're sort of like just hitting our stride. We got these regulatory approvals. We have like basically just a clear space ahead of us. And this is like 2021, so like right before markets crashed and like COVID really took over.
Mhm.
And so really hard to know what would have happened, in hindsight. Might have been sort of right, the right time, right place,
Mhm.
right situation. But I think the biggest thing is that like immediately after that transaction, I just I stepped out of this world and I realized I was just in a bubble for 7 years. And there's way more than drones and air taxis and self driving cars and robotics. In fact, the rest of the world doesn't even really think about it all that often.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it sounds crazy for me to say. I get that. But truly, it was shocking. Every book that I read, every conference I went to, I was at a different conference, every 2 weeks. I was basically just flying around constantly. Every person in politics I spoke to, every person in the government I spoke to, like worked on drones
Hmm.
and robotics and self-driving cars. Every partner, every component supplier was pitching me on like why the screw was the perfect screw for a drone. And it was probably because they were at a drone conference,
Right,
right?
right.
Like they knew their clientele, and they were pitching why this screw was the best screw for military applications. At the conference next door. But stepping out of that bubble immediately made me think like there's so many other things that I think I could have value in.
Mhm.
And even this industry is like very early on and like not quite ready for prime time and like mass distribution. I like probably in 2021, I created a list of like 50 different startup ideas and just like went through the list. I started coding again. I hadn't coded in a little while, and just prototyping stuff and talking to potential clients and just calling folks and talking to investors about trends they were seeing. And we had a kid, we had our first kid and bought a house in the Bay Area. And sort of on the side, I built this like basically an investing platform for myself. And because I was getting introduced to all these financial
Oh,
advisors, and
yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think I showed up on like some list at some point because I was getting wealth managers and private bankers calling me, and all of them were great salespeople, right? They could always point. They would ask me a bunch of questions, and then they would pinpoint and say, like, Alex, I think the thing that you really need, like, this is like the difference between whether you get to pass on a fortune to your kids or you die penniless. You need this like specific kind of irrevocable trust, you know? And I think we're pretty much the only firm that can help you set it up.
Right, right.
Like, okay. And then the next person will be like, like the thing that you're really missing right now and like all the investing that you're doing, like you're not really considering taxes properly. You need to be doing continuous tax loss harvesting. Like, okay, that's kind of interesting. Let me look into that. And then ask a bunch of follow-up questions, and you sort of realize like they all have their one thing that they're like good at, and sort of like that's what they lead with in the sales conversation.
Well, what I've
But
found from these, because like, I
mm,
haven't done the exit, but they're all like, "When you exit, Alex," and I'm like, First and
mm,
foremost, you don't know me." But they're all
it's Alexander to
yeah,
you.
right. They're all really, I think they're just selling themselves, and then, like, how much money they'll actually help you make is, like, second or even tertiary to that. It's just like you just need to
Mm,
pick somebody you really like, and it's like, and if you like me, and I'd love to help you out. And it's like, well, what do you do? Like, what are you even gonna do? Like, does your service actually necessitate that I pay you $400,000 a year? It's like, I don't know if it does.
yeah, 1%, 1.5%,
Can add up
right?
very, very
Regardless
quick.
of
Yeah.
performance. There's like conflicts of interest in like the mutual funds they put you in sometimes. They like have a special relationship with like that mutual fund provider.
Mm.
There's conflicts of interest that show up in other places. It's like it's very rare that you get truly personalized guidance as well. And so, or at least in my experience, like a lot of the financial advisors that I talk to have like a single central investment committee, and they make the decision. They basically like build a fund,
Ah.
and then the salespeople or like the actual financial advisors that you have a relationship with basically just like try to convince you that like this specific setup of their fund is the best scenario, is the best situation for you. but a lot of the financial advisors at the edge aren't really allowed to make many
Right.
decisions on from an investment standpoint. And it's like it's a way for like compliance to have control and to like not give crazy advice to people and be able to audit things properly and make sure that the advice they give is like not crazy from one financial advisor to another, but it feels very much like they're just selling this one product that isn't very differentiated. And I'm obviously making like a huge generalization across a $240 billion industry, right? And it's by no means dead, right? It's actually growing, every single year.
Mhm.
And it's possible because it's like boomers holding on to their money, and that just like keeps growing and growing and growing.
Mhm.
Uh, but like in talking to other folks, I realized that most other millennials just like decided to do it on their own,
Yeah.
and like millennials en masse are just leaving human financial advisors behind, and they're just like self-directed investors and decide to do their own taxes and investing, and everyone has a small crypto account and a 401k and an IRA and 529s and some real estate, and there's like a lot of different options out there. And I think that you know right I read recently that 30% of millennials are have a financial advisor, and the other 70% are self-directed investors.
Mm.
And I don't know exactly how this breaks down, but like in my experience, it's probably something like 2% of those people that are self-directed investors are like active traders, and like it's a hobby for them, right? All right, or they're like treating it as a profession, right? But it's like they're actively investing, they love it, they're in it all the time. And so, what are the other 68% of people doing, right? And that was sort of like the question that like I couldn't quite figure out.
Mm.
They've given up on human financial advisors. They're managing their money themselves. They're not active investors. There's lots and lots of tools for active investors, and there's lots of trading apps and Bloomberg Light for the retail investor and signal generators and alternative data sources and Motley Fool and Wall Street Bets, and I probably spoke to 1,000 people, and the short answer I got was like everyone is sort of just like a little bit nervous, and everyone knows that they're like currently not in an optimized situation, and everyone assumes that like there's probably something better they can be doing than what they're doing right now, but like their current situation is okay, so it's like I'm not panicking, but there is something better to do. And when I when I asked people what they really wanted, I think most people said, like it would be nice to sort of like get some sort of guidance on this. If I could have a human financial advisor that just costs me like I don't know sub $1,000 a year, and just like sits with me for I don't know half an hour every month and sort of just like gives me a few pointers on I don't know what it is, but like something personal to my situation, right? Could be tax optimization. I'm paying too much in fees. I have idle cash. I need to like work on my downside protection. Inflation's like getting really hot, and so I got to do something about that. I'm not on track for my retirement account. My retirement. I got to be putting more money into a Roth IRA. Sometimes I just want to ask stupid questions about like what is a Roth IRA. You should think about 529s. Guardianship for your kids is really important. You haven't updated your will in the last 2 years, right? There's 1,000 things that I would like to sort of like proactively be recommend, be guided on, and ran the numbers, and it just didn't really make sense to do that with a human. But the idea of doing that, being that personal guide for people with AI, just clicked for me. It just made so much sense. I actually think if you took the human out of the loop and removed the human bias, you could look at way more people, way more information. You could get way more personalized than like anything I'd ever seen out there.
Mm.
And importantly, it was just something I wanted for myself.
Mm.
And so I think we spent the first year and a half just building something for me. And I showed it to people, and they would say, you know, that's like really exciting, but like I actually care about dividends. Like you don't seem to care about dividend at all. Dividends are really important for me. And so you could like basically over time and talking to more and more people, we basically just added different filters and settings and found a way to onboard people in a smart way. So we could sort of like infer a bunch of those settings and parameters. And then the more you interact with the models, the smarter they get and the more personalized it gets for you. And so, here we are 3 years in. We actually got regulatory approval with the SEC to operate as a financial advisor and give actual fiduciary advice.
Whoa. I
And that was like cool, painful process.
I believe that.
And
What was more
I
painful,
don't,
dealing with, the regulatory issues with your drones or dealing with the SEC?
the FAA for sure. Like it was, that was like truly because there were no rules, right? We
Mm.
literally worked with the regulators to write the rules.
Mm, I see.
We sat on and set up standardization bodies and committees. We had, lobbyists in DC that we hired
Oh gosh.
to like you know, language and bills in Congress. There was I would spend so much time in DC. Like we had people from the FAA and other civil aviation authorities fly out to our test site. We actually like took our test team on the road at some point, and we went to Alaska because one guy at the FAA was not convinced that the system would work if there was snow on the ground.
Mm.
And we took it to Kansas and did a sort of a bake off with like different kinds of aircraft, and we took it to Florida and Virginia. And uh, no, it was like with the SEC at least there's like a specific set of
I
rules.
see.
I So with the FAA, the interesting thing was that we really need to prove out accuracy of the system
Got it.
and accuracy, reliability. Have you done enough testing? With the SEC, they care much less about the accuracy of the system,
Okay.
right? They say like if you're a registered investment advisor, you this is not a like we give you approval to act as a registered investment advisor. You get this. It does not imply any sort of competence on your part, or it doesn't imply that the SEC has vetted the advice you give and guarantees a certain level of quality for the
Well, that
advice.
actually probably helps you that markets are just extremely random. So, like, if I tell you, "Dude, go buy Apple. Apple's a great company. It could tank tomorrow." And then you'd be like, "Well, hey, you can't hold me responsible for that." Like,
It is the basic. So 100% yes, right? There's a lot of cover just like based on volatility of markets. And it's the way the human financial advisors have typically also gotten away with it,
mhm.
right? Right. If you have a human financial advisor, the smart thing for the human financial advisor to do is to take credit for all the wins and blame the market for all the
Of
losses,
course.
right?
Of course.
COVID, everyone's losing
Right.
money, right?
Tariffs.
Like, thank God you only lost, 10%. There are other people out there that lost 13%.
Right.
Like, good thing we didn't leverage your accounts, right? You would have lost way more money. Like, okay, I guess that's a good thing, and I'm happy that you're managing it for me because I theoretically could have lost more if I invested kind of like my crypto friends, but
Yeah.
I don't know. Is that like not doing it? Does that make up for blah blah? But so the tricky thing with the SEC is that they care a lot more about the kinds of things you say,
Mm.
publicly,
Got it.
right? Like even for a podcast like this, I have to be quite careful about the kinds of things I cannot say. Like I would never be able to like make guarantees around like the price of Apple.
Mhm.
there's you would be able to say it, right? You can say very definitively with like zero repercussions, like what you think the price of Apple is going to be next week. I would get in a lot of trouble for like making very specific predictions like that. And like, you know, I would never be able to guarantee a certain level of performance. And so there's a lot of these sort of like marketing rules because a lot of what the SEC does is it's a lot about consumer protection.
Mhm.
It's not really about like vetting the algorithms or the investment advice we give.
Mm.
If we get investment advice, we need to be able to stand behind it. We need to have audit trails for it. We need to have a compliance program. We need to, make sure that we don't accidentally introduce conflicts of interest into our system. We need to have all kinds of, disclosures about, the AI that we use, things like that. So we have, I don't know how long it is, like a 400-page compliance
Oh,
manual, something like
jeez.
this, and regular audits and a compliance team that we work with, and
Was that
pain in the
was that
ass,
diffi
absolutely necessary, but it allows us to do this thing that we think is very differentiating.
was it difficult to set that up, like, through your AI rules, or is there
Yeah.
just like a, "Hey, don't ever say X," and then like, "Alright, cool," and then you just have to probably keep going through test and use cases like, "Ah, they said that." It's like, probably couldn't or shouldn't say that. Hey, that was
The
also a little
thing we were
bullying.
pretty clear about from the very beginning is that we don't actually use like these large language models for the advice itself.
'Kay.
And so even like OpenAI blocked us from generating advice directly using their system, for example.
Hmm.
And so when we talk about AI, we're actually talking about like this fairly complex stack that we've built with like there is a recommender engine in it, that's similar to what like Meta or Netflix uses to be able to serve up content,
I see.
right? And decide like what's interesting for you. We use portfolio management tools like inspired from the hedge fund world.
Mm,
Right? We have efficient frontier optimizers in the systems, and we've built a Black-Scholes model that thinks about option strategies. And we're looking at modern portfolio theory and measuring betas and volatilities for securities. And there's a forecasting engine with a dynamic factor model, similar to what the Fed uses to model out interest rates and GDP and inflation. We have like fairly standard, Wall Street standard CAPM models that think about the trade-off between risk and reward. We have built multivariate machine learning forecasting models that think about 12-month forecast. There's ensemble models that tie these things together, knowledge graph, relationships. Like there's this like a complicated tech stack that eventually connects your portfolio, what's happening in markets, your preferences, and results in Alex. In June, you should do these three very specific things, and this will improve your financial situation.
mm. Yeah, I actually
And so,
I
like,
was just
most of our clients basically just see like the tip of the iceberg, right? And then there's sort of the rest of it that's under the surface, like carrying the weight.
I was gonna say I signed up earlier today, and I haven't gotten to connect. Can I, like will I be able to connect in my, like, investment, house? I use E-Trade.
Yeah, yeah, we support 13,000 different institutions,
Alright.
crypto
Let's go,
wallets,
baby.
retirement accounts, lots of people with E-Trade connected accounts.
Yep. I fall into that.
You can also like, but I mean, some people are like a little nervous about that, right? Especially on day one, right? People trust us sort of over time, as you can imagine. And so we had a lot of people ask us like, "Hey, can I enter this manually?" Right? I don't want to connect my account right away. So, sure, here you go, enter it. And then people say, "Oh, it's a pain in the ass to enter 40 different items in my portfolio." Said, okay, what if we let you take a screenshot of your portfolio or upload a statement? And so now you can upload a statement, a CSV file, a spreadsheet. You can enter it manually. You can just copy and paste it basically in any format. Right. So we have AIs that will actually just work on the import process too to make it easy to set up and onboard. We want it to be as simple as, walking into a financial advisor's office and just saying like, okay, like you just need to answer a few questions. Just show us one of your statements, and we can give you an assessment and sort of like start calling out potential optimizations here.
Mm. So I'm in that 2% that I like to trade. It's fun for me. What would you expect the platform to probably say to me? Because I'm like very concentrated in certain stuff and getting in, getting out. Is it going to say, "Hey, Alex, like anything about your long term goals here?"
Uh, well, the interesting thing is that part of the onboarding questions is about long-term goals. Like, what are you focused on? Are you focused on retirement right now? Are you focused on just making money?
So I got
Like,
yeah,
are
I
you
got
growing at all costs? What kind of risk tolerances? Is it like you trying to build up some sort of like income generating portfolio here? You can also separate your investment accounts. You could say like, okay, here's my 401k. Here's my like house. Here is my 529. Here is my like wife's IRA. And all of that is like sort of moderately aggressive long-term growth. And then I have sort of a separate bucket, which I call fun money.
that's what I got.
know?
Yeah.
It's my like interactive brokers account and my Coinbase account. And like we had options, right? Like as you can imagine, like we ask you what your risk preference is, and we have a little quiz, if you want to take that. And very aggressive was sort of like, okay, like few people are going to take very aggressive. And we actually found out at some point that very aggressive is like way too limiting for some people, right? Like for some people, they would take very aggressive and they would be like 60% like Bitcoin
Mm,
and Tesla and very happy with that. Like they would be like perfectly fine. Like, look, this is my separate account. I'm just going to like try to maximize
yep.
everything. And for those people, we actually added an extreme risk option. It actually only shows up in some cases in the product. It doesn't even show up in like the onboarding process. And I think people even feel like they've sort of unlocked a level if they like, get the extreme option. Uh, but even then, like you can think about hedge funds, right? Most hedge funds are taking fairly extreme risk,
Mm,
or they're taking fairly extreme positions, right? They're really looking for dislocations. They're holding money for a relatively short amount of time. But typically, even these hedge funds, a lot of what they do is risk management. And so they're constantly trying to build a high expected return, low correlated portfolio that is sort of taken out a lot of the macro risk out of the portfolio. And so even in your situation, right, we'll recommend individual stocks to you, if you set it up like that and like say you want, high eccentricity individual stock recommendations, we'll give them to you. But then what the system is going to try to get you to do is build a more balanced portfolio.
yeah.
And that doesn't mean, sell your Bitcoin and buy bonds, right? But it probably means that you should have sector diversification.
Mhm.
You should think about like, how can you get high expected return securities with international exposure? How do you think about like building a macro neutral portfolio so that, if inflation surprises in a big way next month because of whatever tariffs, war, supply and demand, Fed cuts, who knows what's going to happen? But if inflation spikes next month, then it's probably not good for equities. So if you're holding all equities, like probably going to be problematic. And so can you get high expected return securities inside this portfolio that actually do well in high inflation environments?
Mm,
I don't know, maybe commodities, for example. Well, like I don't know how much you hold in commodities, but like there are very, very risky things that have high expected return commodity investments you can make that are completely uncorrelated from the rest of your, tech
mhm.
stocks. So there's really interesting things like that that you can do where like you're not sacrificing expected returns for downside protection.
Thinking about the efficiency of the entire portfolio and like how you put it all together, right? A lot of people, I think, still think in this fairly antiquated model where stocks are used for returns and bonds are, the brakes. They're like what gives you downside protection. But in reality, I think what like most experts know is that you can build a portfolio of uncorrelated assets that can actually perform quite well and has built-in downside protection. And so like you can think about PortfolioPilot sort of at its core, just helping you think about optimizing, risk match, risk adjusted returns, and downside protection at the same time to be able to try to improve your overall risk adjusted returns.
We could probably talk about that for a long time, but talk to me a little bit about the business model. Two things: one, how do you guys make money? And then two, how are you attracting users? You said there's $30 billion. Like, it's not in the platform. I thought initially like I would have to put money into your platform, like E-Trade with AI, but it sounds more like Connect will watch what you're doing and then give you more advice. So like
Yep.
how are you attracting people in this kind of capital inflow, and how are you making money off of it?
Yeah, as much as possible, we wanted to disentangle ourselves from all the incentives of sort of like traditional financial services.
Mm.
And so like if we basically, in short, the way we make money is off of monthly memberships.
Okay.
And so you can pay $20 a month to get access to PortfolioPilot Gold, which gives you access to our actual automated, personalized, fiduciary financial advice. And so there's a free tier that allows you to simply just do portfolio tracking and analytics, and we'll give you an assessment, and we'll call out a couple optimization opportunities. And then if you want the real advice, it crosses the line to where we need to be registered to charge for a service like that. Then $29 a month for the monthly plan, $20 a month if you pay annually, which I think is crazy low, right? Like our ideal is that the system pays for itself.
Right.
Our hope is that we can give you advice that's worth at least $20 a month, if not way more than that. And so it's probably not priced very efficiently at the moment, but we wanted to make it very accessible, and clearly it's working. Right? There's more and more people joining. And then we don't manage your money for you, right? We don't actually have discretionary control over your assets, which means that we can give the advice, we can give you the guidance, and then at the end of the day, you decide to pull the trigger. And so I think there's a massive group of people that wants to be somewhat involved. They don't want to give away complete control. They don't quite trust the other person to have complete control. They want to feel like they're involved because they want to learn, and and so we're serving those people, right? Which is luckily like something like 70% of millennials at this point. And we often talk about the fact that we do 95% of the work for you and then bring you these optimization suggestions, and all you need to do is yes, oh no, like I don't like that, or regenerate that one, or like every time you thumbs up or thumbs down one of the suggestions, then we learn from that, and the next time we give you advice that's a little bit more tailored to you. And it all still goes through this core auditing system, so we feel comfortable about the fact that it's good advice. And you can get it as much or as little as you want, right? Kind of like a gym membership, right? For some people, it's like, okay, I want to improve myself, so I'm gonna get this gym membership. Then it's really up to you how often you go into the gym or not. Some people use the product like hours every day, and to be honest, I don't know what they do in the products. Like, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's worth spending
say.
hours every day, in PortfolioPilot. I think our ideal is that people spend like an hour or two a month with the product. We are not actively trying to pull people into the product every day. at the end of the day, like we would love it if you had some sort of monthly ritual, check in on things, make a few optimizations. A lot of our customers are getting a paycheck, right? And so sort of twice a month, they have some new money that they're putting away into some long-term investments. And if we can help them figure out, where to invest their next $1,000, that by itself is useful. And so, that's really the kind of service that we want to be and want to offer.
Well, I know you got a hard stop coming up, but one last question: where could you see this product going in the future? Because it seems like the way you described it, I'm sure your mind's already done this exercise 100 times over. But like, where could you see this product going, or maybe other applications that you could see with all this data you're collecting? Kind of like your other business, the product wasn't really the product; it was like that regulatory approval. This I could see being similar to that.
I think at the end of the day, there's this sort of near-term future, like in the next 3 to 5 years, where each of us has our own team of AI agents and assistants and experts helping us live life to the fullest. And I think we will have a personal dietitian working with us. Right? We will have a medical doctor level expert sort of like thinking about each question, looking at our lives and integrate it into our fitness apps and measuring devices and whatnot. We'll have a lawyer to deal with things as we go along. We'll have a personal assistant that books stuff for us. And we'll have a personal financial advisor, right? That's sort of constantly. And I think the real benefit of all of these agents, these sort of AIs around you, is that they're all an expert in their own domain. They're all sufficiently regulated and trained on sort of like some set of specific data for like whatever makes sense for them. And it's proactive, right? I think ChatGPT is wonderful, right? Absolutely changed the world. The main problem is that you need to know what question to ask. And so you need to be the one to sort of initiate the conversation. Whereas I think what I really want is for these AIs to proactively anticipate my needs and what I want, and sort of work with me on these longer term timescales. Right. And so the idea that like the AI can ping me and say, look, the market is down. First of all, sorry, right? You lost 5%. Like, don't worry about this. A little psychological coaching, like we're in it for the long run. But also, like I noticed that you have, $8,000 in tax loss harvesting opportunities that just opened up. If you sell these right now and replace them with these other funds, then we can book the losses, keep the same exposure in your portfolio. Would you like me to go ahead and execute those things for you? Like, whoa, right? Suddenly I feel a lot better about this dip that we experienced today. I wouldn't even have thought to connect those dots and look for that opportunity. And so the idea that we can send out those alerts automatically and sort of like help people at the right moment, depending on what's happening, right? Like as an individual, we just don't have time to look at all of these different opportunities. And if I had known about continuous tax loss harvesting, if I was sort of like, if I read an article about it, if I like entered all my data into ChatGPT, I probably could have asked it like, hey, do I have some opportunities here? But I just, I'm not thinking about that on that particular day. I think that's the real future here, right? We want to be people's trusted financial advisor that you go to for everything finance related. And we can sort of just be there in the background. You set us up once, you interact once in a while. And we're already covering like a fairly large swath of things today. I actually think that, between now and even just the end of the year, I don't think we need to add more features. I think all we really need to do is just a little bit more storytelling. We need to clean up the interface a little bit more. We need to make it more consumer friendly. We need to make it more reliable. We need to improve the data quality. the account connections. We need to, deal with more edge cases. I think it's good. But like, if I think like, what's the difference between where we're at right now and this sort of like 5-year future where 50 million people, trust our financial advisor in their pocket, connected to their personal life, then, there's a little more cleanup to do.
That's amazing, man. I'm excited to get in there and try it. I'm excited to see where it all goes.
I'm excited to hear back from you. Tell me what you think.
I will.
Truly,
I will.
I mean, to make the onboarding better, to make the user experience better, it's 1,000 little changes, right? So we need feedback from as many users as we possibly can get.
Well, one piece of feedback, I couldn't unclick one. One of them was selected, and I couldn't unselect it. So I went forward.
Probably in the onboarding process, as part of that, we asked you at some point, what kind of recommendations do you want to see? And one of the things that we force people to get recommendations for is ETFs.
That was it.
Is that what you're thinking about?
Yeah, that was it.
It's
maybe just a little blurb, like, sorry, you have to do this one.
Yeah, it is a little contentious, actually. Even internally, we have some debates about that, right? Like, do we want to force people into a specific kind of like down a specific route? Mm-hmm. But for example, for you, like if you enter your like very high tech, your very highly concentrated tech portfolio, we give you recommendations. It might be the case, or my guess is it's probably the case, that like some of the highest influence recommendations that will come up will be like commodities ETFs, for example, mm-hmm. to give you sort of like broad asset exposure to a completely different class than you have exposure to right now. Mm-hmm. And like what we found is that it's a very useful way to sort of like immediately like sort of knock people into a different mindset and help them think about their investing world a little bit more broadly without immediately recommending that people start buying oil futures, right? Like that's a little crazy to start with.
Yeah. Give them some slow intros. I'll give you feedback, man. Where can people
I'd love to hear it.
Catch up with you and all the stuff that you're doing, and check out the products, of course?
Yeah, please. And from anybody listening, like reach out. Like truly, like I have 2 to 3 calls with customers every day right now. Like every single one of those calls, we end up changing a small thing. We move components, we make something a little bit more clear. We add tooltips. Sometimes we just delete stuff, right? It's like, that's too confusing, or we hide it behind sort of a click further in, right? You don't need that in the onboarding experience. It's overly confusing, or deal with edge cases. And so it's like another 1,000 little optimizations before it's like really, truly ready for millions of people.
Okay. Very cool, man. We'll make sure we link all the products and stuff. And thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you, man.
I appreciate that. Alex, excellent. I love the mustache.
Thank you.
I love the conversation.
Yes. Hopefully not our last one, man. I'll get on the platform and I'll tell you what I think.
Please do.
All right. Thank you, man. Have a good night.